All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Rock Your Brand podcast. And we are going to be talking about something today that, we've been asked in the past. And it's something that we've got a lot of experience in, actually. And that is Amazon FBA versus Etsy print on demand. And in 2023, that's what we're going to be talking about here today because, there's opportunity in both of those areas, in both of those platforms. There are pros and there are cons, and we have seen all of them because we've done all of them. And we're going to walk through exactly what that looks like. So this way here, you have a better understanding. Maybe right now you're considering doing Amazon FBA, maybe private labeling, and you want to go down that road. Nothing wrong with that road, by the way, although I'm going to explain, and Chris is going to help me explain why we decided to kind of go away from that, at least for the time being, and why we are now focusing heavily on the Etsy platform and what our future plans are with that. So that's what we're going to be talking about here on this episode. I'm fired up. Chris, are you ready to dive in and start talking about this, this popular topic that I know people are going to want to hear about?
I am, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on some of the pros and cons, because we haven't really talked through this the way that sometimes we talk through these topics just to make sure that we cover everything.
Right.
I know that, like for a while you were the Amazon guy, right? Like that was kind of how people started to know you. And that's how we got to know each other, was through Amazon FBA, right? And so, a lot of people over the last really 2 years have been saying, like, do you hate Amazon now? And the answer is no, right? But there's some other opportunities that are also available. And there's some reasons why people may want to do something more in the Amazon ecosystem. And there's some reasons why they weren't. And so rather than having to answer these questions over and over again, we figured we'd sit down and we'd kind of chat through what our thoughts are as it stands right now, at the end of March in 2023. What does it look like, Amazon FBA versus Etsy print on demand? When does one work versus the other? And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I know we'll get some good insight from everybody that's watching along with us as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask anyone right now that is here with us live or on the replay of this, and if you're on the podcast, you can always send us this reply at scott@brandcreators.com. But what I'd like to know is, have you ever sold on Amazon? And if you have, how long have you been selling? So if you can put that in there, that would be great. If you are selling on Etsy but are considering Amazon, I'd like to know that as well. So kind of let us know where you're at and if you've already experienced selling on Amazon or Etsy, and which one you are using right now currently. So I'd love to see that inside of the comments, or again, if you're listening to the podcast, when you get a chance, you can always email us or reach us at, in the Facebook group, which I should probably mention, guys. If you're not yet in our Facebook group for the Rock Your Brand, head on over to brandcreators.com/group, and you can join us on these live streams as we're doing them. All right. So I'm going to definitely want to hear your thoughts as well, Chris. I know you and I have both had some reasonings as far as why we, kind of are not going back over to Amazon right now currently. Doesn't mean we won't ever do it, but and I'll kind of just go through it, Chris, and kind of like tee it up here a little bit for us. So it was back in 2000, I think late 14, 2015 is when I actually launched my first product. And guys, and Chris, I didn't even tell you this, but I'm going to tell you guys what my first product was. It's so long ago now, doesn't even really matter. Okay. So I first started, back in 2015, and I was selling exercise bands. Okay. That was my first product. And it was the one that had like 5 different bands, right? Those little bands that you'd put between your legs and you would kind of do your stretches and stuff. And still to this day, there's people using them and they're selling. And my daughter actually uses them for some of her volleyball training and stuff. But that product, when I launched it, I followed the whole process. And I'll kind of go through that process here in a second, because it's pretty similar to what you would do today. It's just things are a little bit different, but got that thing rolling and did over $300,000 in sales the very first 12 months on Amazon, which is incredible. right? Crazy. I think in the first 90 days, we did like $45,000, like something like that. Now, again, that's not all profit. Of course, people always put out the screenshots and all that stuff, but it was eye-opening, to say the least, right? Like, it was like, whoa, like what's going on here? Like, we have this, product now that is selling. What do I do with this? And I decided to add a few more products to it. It was like more exercise bandy stuff, right? And more in the exercise, realm and all of that stuff. And it did pretty well. Okay. It did pretty well. And that's when I actually started to teach what I was doing and all of that stuff, right? Because I'm always teaching what I'm doing. I'm never going to teach you something I've never done before. And so that opened my eyes, but it also opened my eyes to, wow, there's a lot of money that's going out to get this thing going and to get this thing to where you're launching new products. You're having to, have more money for inventory. It's really inventory heavy, because think about this. And I want to take you back to that day. I had a conversation with my wife back there in 2014. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this private label thing on Amazon, selling on FBA. And Amazon FBA, by the way that it works is you buy product, you ship it into Amazon. Amazon will then store it. And then when you make a sale, they will ship it. It's beautiful, right? The thing is, I had to spend $5,000 on inventory. So I bought 1,000 bands, okay, packages. I bought those and I then shipped them into Amazon. And I think I was selling them for like $19.99 and I was buying them for $5, right? So after fees and everything, I was making about $10 profit, which was great. Okay, not bad. But I wanted to launch a new product. So then what do I have to do? I got to take some of the money that I'm making and I have to roll it into another product where I got to borrow the money. The other thing is, it was very risky because I was like, well, if this doesn't sell, I'm stuck with like 1,000 band sets, right? And that can be, kind of scary. So I went ahead and started to kind of continue to go down that path, and it was great. But then I had a neighbor of mine who was a blogger and had some experience in that area. And we got talking one day at a little dinner that we were having in her backyard. I remember it to this day. We were making, I think it was like brick oven pizza in her backyard. She's got a beautiful like brick oven pizza. Her name is Debbie, by the way. And you guys probably heard me talk about her if you've been listening for any period of time. She's the one that we went into business together with for that brand. And we ended up building that brand, doing over 7 figures in sales, and then ended up ultimately selling that brand. So I learned a ton from selling that first product and a few other products in that brand. We sold over 7 figures in exercise bands. And then from there, carried that over to, with her, and we built out a full-fledged brand where we were more focused on the niche that we were targeting and all of that stuff. We built out a blog, we built out an email list, we did, email giveaways and things. We did everything the way that I've always taught it, right? If you guys have been following, if you guys are listening on the podcast, everything that we've done in the past has been really everything that I've learned from the past. And we built that up. And then we went ahead and ended up selling that brand in, I believe it was 2020. It was right around the pandemic time. And we actually had the deal, and then we lost the deal, and then we ended up getting another deal. And so we ended up doing really, really well with that. But the one reason why we sold that business, one of the primary reasons, is because of inventory. And because of the issues with inventory. And I don't mean just inventory like you got to buy it. That was, again, we had like $100,000 in inventory sitting in the warehouse, hoping that it's going to sell all the time. And I know friends of mine that, they've had $1 million. I mean, think about sleeping at night with $1 million in inventory and hoping that you don't get banned or, shut down by Amazon, which has happened to people, by the way. So the inventory is really what took a toll. And my partner reached out to me and said, I think it's time. Like, I mean, I'm balancing the orders. And then, she was doing a lot of the day-to-day because she was ordering the inventory and then getting it in. And then her and I would meet at the warehouse, and then we would, bring it over to, the post office and ship in a bunch of boxes and all of that stuff. So it became really, really time consuming, but also stressful. Very, very stressful. And that's when we decided to sell. And that's when we made the most money, honestly, in our pockets, right? Because, and they always say that when you sell a business, when you have an inventory heavy business, the day that you sell the business is the day you're going to make the most money. And sometimes that's when you make your money, right? Because you're constantly buying for inventory. You're pre-planning for fourth quarter, right? Oh my gosh, like last fourth quarter, we did this. We got to make sure we got enough, right? We got to make sure that we got enough. And if we do have enough, that's great, but we don't want to overbuy. Because then if we overbuy, we got too much inventory. And now we're sitting on more money sitting in the bank. So yeah. So that is like a big picture. That's kind of where we're at and why we decided to kind of go down the Etsy side. And again, just to kind of finish up that story, my partner, Debbie, who I think is chiming in here on the comments as well. Hey, Deb, she basically started dabbling in Etsy and doing print on demand. And then she was telling my wife about it. And I was kind of hearing it a little bit, but I was like, you know what? I'm done with I just want to take a break on e-com for a little while. I just want to take a little break. Right. And I kept hearing about it. And my wife would tell me on our walk, she'd be like, yo, Debbie's doing pretty good on that print on demand thing. She's really doing good. I mean, she's got that thing rolling and, she's making like, I don't know, $5,000, then $10,000. And then I heard she's going to break six figures. And I'm like, wait a minute here. And she's not doing any inventory or anything. And then we started to kind of talk a little bit. And then I started to see what my wife was doing because she introduced it to my wife. My wife, by the way, was just doing it strictly as just a little side hustle, a little hobby, and did like 20K her first year. And it was all print on demand. So no inventory. And the cool thing about that is with no inventory, there's no overhead really, right? It's like you don't buy that product until you sell the product. So you don't have to pay for it until you actually sell that product. So that's kind of how we arrived to where we are. All right. And so what we're going to do today, though, is break down some of the pros, some of the cons on both of these. And I kind of already went over a few, but we'll break these down a little bit further. But Chris, did I do a good job painting the picture there?
I think you did. And it's funny, like I knew what you sold because I had at one point, you asked me to log into your Amazon account, but I don't think we've ever talked about that before. And we actually had some people back in the day of the podcast, like send you emails asking if this was yours, whatever, right? And you were like, I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, because of the way that competition worked on Amazon, right? It was very different from Etsy. So I think that's a nugget for anybody that's been around for a long time. People have speculated for a while about what Scott's first product was on Amazon, and now you know. I think the obvious differences, Scott, are the inventory things. Right. So with an Amazon FBA business, especially on the private label side of stuff, right, you have a big inventory outlay. And I think you said about $5,000. That's not uncommon, right? Yep. We used to say 5 to 7 was the number that we liked people to use as that initial outlay. So compare just that, right? That doesn't take into consideration any of the marketing costs, any of those kinds of things. That's just your get started cost versus the creation of an Etsy store. Scott, what does it cost to start a print on demand business on the Etsy side of things?
Honestly, like right now, I think it would be hard to spend $100 because really, when you think about it, you need to set up your Etsy shop. And on your Etsy shop, you really don't have to pay to open it. The only thing you have to pay for is your listings. Now on Amazon, you have to have an Amazon account, right? And that's like, you don't have to have a seller's account you have to have a seller's account, but you don't have to have, and I forget what they call it now, but basically an account that allows you to get a little bit of a discount. You're also able to list more products. Like there's some things, and there's probably new things nowadays, but it was like $40, like $39.99. And I don't know if that's the same as it is right now, but that's what it was when we started. So $39.99 is just to open your account and get yourself to where you can sell, more than like 10 listings or whatever it was. I forget what it was. But on the Etsy side, like literally like 20 cents per listing. So you could start, and then even going into like, okay, and some people say this, but yeah, but if I sell an item and I have Printify, ship the item and do all that stuff, I got to pay for that. You do, but you can get a credit card connected to the account. You got 30 days. You're going to get paid the money that you just spent before the credit card bills due. And then you're basically just having this revolving credit line constantly paid, open, and you just keep doing that. And if you're smart, you can actually get a credit card that has some type of points or something tied to that. And then you're going to start earning on that side as well. So that's, it doesn't cost hardly anything. And the reason why I said $100, because you might want to spend money on your first design, or you might want to have a banner created, or you might want to add some things to it. You might want to open an Aweber account. There's some tools. You might want to use Everbee. You might want to use some tools to help you. But if you had $100 to get started, that would probably be enough. And I would even say I take some of that and use for my Etsy ads, maybe my first 50 or $75.
Yeah, I think to even get to the inventory cost of something like an Amazon FBA business, you'd have to seriously screw up on the Etsy side of stuff to spend, even if we just say $3,000, right? Before you get to the cost of $3,000, if you're looking at the Etsy thing, you're creating, somebody do the math for me, right? 3,000 times 20 cents, right? How many listings is that? That's a boatload of listings. And I think probably even Debbie or Lisa haven't spent that much, even with renewal fees at this point. But Scott, if somebody were able to take $500, let's up that ante a little bit, because, you and I have talked about $5 a day, give or take, for ads. Is that more than enough to kind of build a solid foothold if you're doing print on demand on the Etsy side of stuff? $100 will probably get you the account. It'll, finding the niche is free, right? You can use Everbee. You don't even have to have a research tool to be able to find a niche. But if you want to really validate it, you want something like Everbee, you can use the free plan there.
Sure.
But if you're looking at a couple different ones, use the pro plan. It makes your life a heck of a lot easier. Right?
Yeah.
Hashtag not sponsored, but still, right? We do get an affiliate commission if you go through our link. So, we'll throw that out there. But if I was starting, that's what I would be doing, right? I'd validate 2 or 3 niches, use the pro plan just to make my life easier.
Yep.
So we're talking $40 there.
Yep.
Right. Let's say somebody opts in for Printify Premium. That's $30 a month.
Yeah, I believe it's 30.
Now, again, you don't need that up.
You don't need that. It's just to save you money, right? That's all it is.
I'm just trying to get to that $500 number, right? Saying, okay, if we have 500, what is the foundation that we can build, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a product and niche validation tool. We have Printify Premium, which doesn't really give us a ton of upfront benefits, but it does once we start selling, right? You can save, I think it's up to 20% on all of their different products. Plus they give you some other nice things, right? And then is the rest of that ads? Or potentially you're going out to Fiverr because you don't have design shops yet, something like that, right? So if somebody were to go to Fiverr to create their first 3 products, how much would that cost on average?
We've gotten some really good stuff. Lisa's done a really good job at finding some good artists, and we can get them done for like $20, right? So it doesn't have to be a ton of money. But I would say, and I did a video on this. I'm not sure it's published yet on YouTube. It may be. But I did a video recently that talked about what you want to do, what we do. Let's just put it that way, is we are treating this as if it was a brick and mortar shop. And here's what I mean. If you were opening a brick and mortar shop, number one, it would cost you a lot of money for the storefront, get it ready, all of your branding, all of the making sure that the inside is set up properly, all of that stuff. Then you got to load it with inventory, all of that stuff. But what I like to do is think about it like you're opening a brick and mortar shop, and you are going to add inventory to it, which isn't going to cost you anything because you're going to create it yourself. Or if you are going to create it, let's say that you are going to spend a little bit of money on Fiverr to have someone do that. From there, you're going to then fill the shop, but then we got to get eyeballs on the shop. And to me, that $500, most of that's going to go towards Etsy ads because I want to get eyeballs. I want to get sales, even if I don't make money. Fun fact here, by the way. Okay. My first product on Amazon way back in the day, the way that we got that thing to take off was we bought 1,000 units. Okay. And I took 150 units and I basically did a 90% off discount. And you would say, Scott, why would you do that? Why would you give a 90% discount and basically lose money? Because I wanted to get sales through that listing so I could start ranking. And it's the same way that it works today, by the way, guys, is Etsy, Amazon, eBay, any of these platforms that have buyers on it, that's a place for people to buy stuff. Their algorithm is based off of sales. So we want to get sales so we can get indexed, so we can get history. And we also want to start getting reviews, right? And so that's how you kickstart it. So you almost have to think in the beginning, like, I'm not going to make any money. I'm opening my shop, my brick and mortar shop, right? I'm not going to make any money, but I got to run a grand opening special. And I don't care if I make any money. I just want people to come into my shop so then they see what it is. They might buy something else, or they're going to tell people about it. And that, to me, is where that money should be spent the most. Does that answer your question, Chris?
It does. And so that kind of leads me down the road. And we had Vincent over on YouTube said, I've spent $250 in my first month. E-rank ever beat ads to get to my first 100 sales. And I'm already getting my first profitable days on the Etsy side, right? That's a couple units on the Amazon side of stuff. Now, yes. Scott, I know it sounds like we're slamming Amazon. Is there a time or a reason that you would still suggest somebody look at Amazon versus Etsy? And the first thing that comes to my mind is overall volume, right? On Amazon, we used to use what we called the 10 by 10 by 1 method, right? Which was one product, 10 sales a day, $10 profit, right? If you're getting 10 sales a day on something on Etsy, that's kind of a unicorn. So the volume on Amazon is higher. Is there another reason you would suggest somebody look at Amazon versus Etsy in 2023?
The only way that I would is if you are trying to sell products that the Etsy platform is not good for, right? If you have products that are, maybe it is parts for, I don't know, a lawnmower, right? And you're like, well, people aren't really on Etsy looking for lawnmower parts, but they're looking for them on Amazon. That's a different story. So you almost have to think about it. If you are currently selling something, is it a good fit for either or both, right? And so if you're just starting, then it's a lot easier to decide, for me anyway, because I'm going to look at what is the least amount that I am going to have to put into this financially and time-wise, right? Because I'm not saying that it's not going to take you time on Etsy. It is. But what I'm saying is the entry is so much easier. It's like the barrier to entry is so much lower. But yes, you are going to have less traffic in a lot of different areas, like maybe lawnmower parts, right? So that's something that you want to think about. So it just comes down to the individual. And that's why I say, if you're watching this or listening to this and you have not yet started, then I would consider Etsy over Amazon for those reasons. Now, if you have maybe a great niche and you have products that you've already manufactured or something, then yes, of course, use Amazon. Why wouldn't you, right? Like tap into, their platform. And that's with any of these platforms. By the way, guys, like I'm actually a huge fan of building your own platform. But when you have a new business and you want to get it jump started, go where the traffic is, go where the buyers are. And in this case, it's Etsy or it's Amazon or whatever, fill in the blanks. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. So I would say it is dependent on the person and the business. But if you haven't started yet, that's why I'm looking at the Etsy side right now more so than the Amazon side, because I've been down that road and I don't feel like having the stress of inventory and having to worry about launching new products. Think about this for a second, Chris. Let's say that we want to launch 5 products, which we've done in the past, guys. We did 5 products. You can ask Debbie that one. That was a stressful run because we were launching 5 new products. We didn't know if they were going to sell. We did our research, and then we did 5 launches, internal launches to our email list to kickstart those products. They ended up doing pretty good, and I think probably 3 out of 5 did well. But still, we had to shell out probably $25,000 to launch those products. If I want to launch 5 products on Etsy, I can do that by the end of the week, and it'll cost me 20 cents a listing. That's the difference. Big one.
Yeah, the math there, Scott, is $1, right? Like that's why you were talking about that. I was like 5 products, 20 cents, $1. I like that, right? So Etsy, the thing I want people to take away from this, I think, is that Etsy is not this oasis in the desert, right? Like, it's not perfect. And there are some things that you may want to take into consideration on the long-term side, right? So you mentioned when you were going through kind of your backstory about you sold the business, and the biggest payday that you ever got out of this was the day that you sold, right? Business is kind of like owning a boat. They say, you know, they make the same joke about boats that they do about business. The best day to own a boat is the day that you buy it. The second best day is the day that you sell it, right? It's kind of the same thing in business, because they're the two least stressful, most optimistic days in your life.
Yeah.
But you can't currently transfer or sell an Etsy store.
Yes.
Right. So if somebody wants to do this, and I'm thinking specifically of somebody that you and I know, because they have an Amazon FBA business, they have a Shopify store, they're dabbling a little bit in Etsy, but one of their long-term goals is to sell and cash out and have enough money from that sale, because you get a nice multiplier, you get all of those things to pay for her kids to go to college, to be able to retire and not have to worry about working ever again, right? If you can't sell an Etsy business, right? So something that's built on Etsy, what is the suggestion? And I know part of the answer to this, and I know where you're going to go with this, but I've seen it being asked. What is the thought process in terms of, should I avoid Etsy there? Or is there a way that I can build on Etsy and then kind of branch out a little bit to be able to also do that portion? Because it's nice to make $100,000 a year on Etsy. It's nice to make whatever your number is, right? $50,000, $100,000, $250,000 a year on Etsy. But if I decide to retire, that just goes away, right? I can't sell that. I can't get a 3x multiple for that. So what is your suggestion to people who are looking at Etsy, but also want that exit strategy?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that is something that's a little bit of a deterrent. And honestly, I thought about that when I was starting this whole thing. I was like, you know, and helping my wife and everything. And it was like, well, what happens if we want to sell this? Now, could Etsy change their rules in the future? They could. But it is definitely a concern. But here's my thought is, if you're more or less testing on Etsy. So the way I look at it is, we're testing on Etsy. We are also, just so you guys know, like on my wife's side, we're building out content. So we do have some content that's out there. We're getting visitors and views to that content. So we're also monetizing a little bit differently over there, that's, you know, talk for another discussion, is we're using content marketing to also drive traffic, build our email list and all of those things. So we do have an entity that we control and own. And I could sell that. I could actually sell that today, right? And make a decent chunk of money, not counting the Etsy side. But what I would like to think about, and this is exactly what Debbie's doing right now, is she's building out the Shopify side. Now, guys, don't confuse Shopify with a platform. Shopify is not a platform. Shopify is an e-commerce site, right? That you are allowed to, not even allowed, but you're able to make a transaction, right? Now, can it be picked up in search and all of that stuff? Yes, but it's not a platform that you're going to put your stuff on and immediately you're going to be tapping into a traffic source. It's not how it works. You're going to be driving traffic, and now you're going to have to learn how to drive traffic. That's why starting on Etsy is a great thing. My point is this. Second phase of this is to definitely take your products and then start adding them, the good selling ones, because you've learned, right? It's easy to put them up on Etsy, but you don't want to put them all over here maybe, right? So then we want to take the ones that are selling well, the ones that we see that are getting searched a lot, and then we want to put them over on our Shopify store. Once we start to do that now, all right, we're evolving now, then I can take that, build that up, and hopefully match my sales on Etsy, and who knows, maybe even do more than on Etsy. And now that becomes something that is sellable. Now, the question is, but what do you do with that? Let's say you have 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 sales on Etsy. Well, here's the cool thing. When we're getting those customers, we're also able to now connect it to Aweber, collect the email addresses. We're building an asset with an email list that we do have control over, and they have consented to us that they're allowing us to basically email them. So now they become an asset to us that is sellable technically with the business, right? So that is another part of it that no one really talks about. So that's another asset. And the other thing that a lot of people don't talk about is, yes, the Etsy shop is not sellable, but the products that we created are. So we can take those products and go, part of the deal is this. You would just have to start a new Etsy shop and put them on there, but they're all proven. Do you think that that's valuable to anyone that has a business? We have, let's say that we do have a Shopify store that's getting sales and all of that, and we have all the rights to the products, and now they can just put them up on Etsy themselves. It's not as good as having a shop that's seasoned, but it's still better than just saying like those products are no good. Does that make sense, Chris?
It does. And I think this is really kind of a two-step approach, right? So I'm glad that you pointed out that Shopify is not a platform. And I want to take just a second to clarify the difference, right? So Etsy and Amazon are what we refer to as marketplaces, right? Go back in your medieval times mindset here for a second, right? Just because marketplaces don't exist most places in the US or Canada or Europe anymore, right? But it's like you'd go there to buy a bunch of different stuff. You'd go there to buy your meat. You go there to buy your vegetables. You go there to buy the fabric to make whatever, right? The traffic comes there, and that's where all the stores are, right? Versus a store that's just off by itself, right? Think Best Buy, just sitting in the middle of a plaza somewhere. They have to do something to get the traffic there. The traffic isn't just coming there, right? They have to drive that. And so Shopify is not a marketplace. They don't have built-in traffic. So you can't just build a Shopify store and expect people to show up. You have to do something. How do you do that? Well, something that I've done for a living for the last 15 years, a little bit longer than that, actually. But you have to learn to master a bunch of different stuff. If you're not already a master at search engine optimization, you're not already a master at driving paid ads, if you're not already a master at email, then starting on a marketplace like Amazon or Etsy is the way to go. But the question is, what is your long-term goal? If you're starting on Amazon and your long-term goal is to sell, you can do that right now. You can just sell an Amazon FBA account. Somebody else can take it over. That's fine. You can't do that on Etsy. But the same things that make your Amazon FBA business, which I would say if you're just existing in a marketplace, you have income, but you don't necessarily have a business because you don't have the resiliency, right? But the same things that make that Amazon FBA business worth more to a buyer are the same things that would allow you to sell your Etsy business, right? What we have with Etsy, the thing that I really like, Scott, is they actually give you permission to email your customers. So Etsy is literally giving us the ability to create that first traffic thing that we have to master, right? Email is as close to free traffic as you can get. Yes, once you get to a certain size, there's a couple $1 a month fee depending on what email service provider you're using, right? But it's as close and it's the most forgiving traffic source. And Etsy is handing us the keys to that long-term growth and stability. So we can sell on Etsy, we can start making money, and then Etsy is literally giving us the keys to that first traffic source. If we can start to master that, even inside of the Etsy ecosystem, once we've started to learn how to send emails, once we've started to learn how to drive traffic, that's when you can a great way to build your home base. And Scott and I typically refer to your website as a home base. It is the lowest learning curve. If you don't like their fees, you don't like that, you can use WooCommerce, you can use BigCommerce, you can use LitCommerce. There's a million other ways to build your own website. Yeah. And that's all that Shopify is. But the key there is that transition, right? We're starting with sales, and we're using those sales to build up our war chest so that we can start to fight the battles outside of Etsy. Yeah. If our long-term goal is to turn around and sell this, then we do want to build some of those long-term things. But the good news is those are the things that make any online business really valuable anyway. And if you can master even a handful of those, then having that outside of Etsy thing becomes a lot less scary. The biggest mistake that I see people make is that they assume that if they build, it's the field of dreams conundrum, right? If we build it, they will come. That happens somewhere like Etsy because there's traffic built in. It doesn't happen when you have your own website. Even if you're using something like Pattern from Etsy, right? People don't just magically show up there. You still have to drive some traffic and do some of those kinds of things. So if your long-term goal is to sell out, you can still absolutely get started on Etsy. Saying sell out sounds bad. To sell your business and have a nice payday at the end of this. You can definitely start on Etsy, but you have to keep that long-term roadmap in mind a little bit more than you would on the Amazon FBA side of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I would like to actually poll the audience here for a second. And if you're on the replay, you can still comment. If you're on the podcast, well, you can head on over to brandcreators.com/group and you can go ahead and comment there. But I would like to know, what are your intentions for your business right now? Is it to start your business as a side hustle that can make an extra $1,000, $2,000 per month? Or are you looking to create a business that's going to potentially replace your 9 to 5? Or is it a business that is you're looking to build up so you can sell, so you can put, your kids through college or whatever? Which, by the way, again, I've been podcasting now for well over 7, 8 years now. I don't even know the exact. Chris, you would probably be able to know that number. But one of our listeners pretty early on had reported back that he had went on to just start a side hustle, and this at the time was doing Amazon and FBA, and his whole goal was to just make enough so he could put his kids through college, and he actually achieved that. And now he has a business asset that's also still generating money, but also is sellable. So that's a cool little thing here that, again, I want to just kind of see where you're at, because everyone's at a different place. And depending on where you're at, it may not matter to you if you ever want to sell it, although it may matter to you. So just curious, drop that in the comments. I'd love to see kind of what your target is and kind of why you're doing this. That would be helpful. Anyway, Chris, do we want to answer any questions, or do we want to keep going here? The one thing I wanted to highlight, we can do this now or we can wait, answer a couple questions, is I wanted to talk a little bit about on the Etsy side, as far as like what are your direct cons? Like and I know we talked about you can't sell the business. That is a con. But what is a con to you for Etsy? Like, what would be a con that would come to mind? And you and I haven't had time to talk about this. I've got a couple of my own, but what is a con that comes to mind for you for Etsy?
Okay, so it's a con for me. I don't know that it's necessarily a con for everybody. One of the things that I've always liked about the Amazon ecosystem, and Etsy is getting a lot better about this, is the amount of data that you had access to. Yeah. Right? Etsy, for the longest time, had a Google Analytics integration that you could integrate Google Analytics with your store. They got rid of that and then didn't replace it with anything. And so you were just left with kind of drips and drops of data. And while that's okay, if you're not a data-driven person and you're just kind of, I don't mean this in a condescending way, dabbling, right? Like, you're selling a few handmade things, that's okay. You don't need all of that data. But if you're trying to grow your business, then it's really hard to understand exactly what's working and what's not. And Etsy recently has started giving us more access through their beta analytics program, which I don't know how much of a beta it really is, Scott, because I'm pretty sure it's in everybody's account, right? But you're starting to get to see what keywords are driving traffic again. Like, you're getting some more in-depth store analytics. And I have a feeling that that is part of the announcement they made back in October, where they said, we want people coming back to buy from the stores that they know and love, versus somebody coming to Etsy, finding one thing that's really cool one time and never really having a reason to come back to the site. They know that they have to give us some more of those tools. I don't need, the granularity of programming my ads to turn on and off every hour of the day, because I realized that on the Amazon ecosystem, if I sell in the first 20 minutes of the hour, it's profitable, but in the last 40 minutes of the hour, I don't need that level. But I would like to see a little bit more clarity on what's working and what's not that I'm doing. And I think they're starting to move that direction, but that's still a little bit of a frustration for me. That's just the first thing that pops into my head.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would figure yours would be around data, because I mean, Chris is our Jimmy Neutron, as I think it was Alpondro that came up with that, which I kind of like that. That's Jimmy Neutron, smart kid. But yeah, data, it's important, right? And Etsy has given us the ability to look at some of the stuff in our Etsy ads, but it's still very, very limited. They also have a beta, like keyword search or how people found your listings thing, which is still in beta. It's been in beta for like 6-8 months. And I love all of that stuff because it allows us to see intel. Amazon is definitely like miles ahead there. Does that make me want to sell on Amazon? No. It just is a I wish they had type of thing for me. But I have some cons here, and I wrote them down, so I'm just gonna be glancing down here. But Number one is they're not as big as Amazon. They just don't have as much traffic. Like plain and simple, like they don't have as much traffic. They aren't as big of a marketplace. They are big, but you're also, like we had talked about earlier, you're not able to sell in all niches. It is a very gift giving place. So that's really where you can do really well, is if you have items that are giftable. On Amazon, you can sell, like I said, lawnmower blades and do great. So that's one thing that I see. It's not as big as Amazon, so that's a con, right? But it doesn't weigh out the other, the other cons on, Amazon and all that stuff. It's easier to get started, but that's actually a con because it creates more competition. And here's what I mean. It's not even that it's more competition that can hurt me, because a lot of times the competition isn't really doing it the correct way, but it's still more competition. It's just easier. The barrier to entry is easier. If it's for you to have to only put out $100 to get started, but on Amazon, it's going to take you $3,000 to $5,000. There's less people that are going to be able to do it. Now, with that being said, it's a bigger marketplace, so it's attracting more people with $5,000 at their disposal. So there's still a lot of competition. I'm not saying there's not a lot of competition. I'm just saying it's easier on Etsy, so it becomes easier for people to get started. So there is more competition there. The other thing is Etsy can shut you down randomly, as can Amazon. And the most recent one is Disney had a lawsuit that went out and basically started shutting down accounts. Now, with that being said, a con here is Etsy doesn't really help us, because they don't, and Debbie can tell you this right now. I mean, she's got a copycat that is just ripping her off left and right, and there's nothing that Etsy can do about it, at least that they say, right? And so I think they're behind in that stuff, so that's a little discouraging. So I would say that's a con. And then the con we already talked about is that you can't sell your shop yet. So hopefully that will change, but those are the big ones for me as far as the cons go, Chris.
Yeah, I think the competition one is probably a big one as well. Because it's so easy, I think, and I don't think it's necessarily a con in and of itself, but paired with the last one that you were talking about, where like enforcement is slightly behind where it is somewhere like Amazon, just because it is a smaller marketplace. On Amazon, you had not just copyright and trademark protections, but they also launched like all of the stuff associated with, and I'm trying to think of what the actual program name was, and I'm blanking, but basically if you had launched a product, you would be the only seller of that product. It's driving me nuts. Somebody in the comments will help me out here in just a second. But it would, because Amazon is slightly different, where Scott, like if you and I both have this water bottle, right? They only want one listing of this water bottle in the ecosystem. So they would allow you and I to both sell on that same listing, right? Etsy doesn't have that, because they want everybody to create their own listings. And I think that creates some problems in and of itself. It's harder to enforce things like copycats, because anybody can create their own listing. And then on top of that, they're encouraged to do it. And so Etsy goes, well, it must be a different product, right? So you kind of lose out on a little bit of that protection. But with the exception of somebody following you around like Debbie's person is doing, is there, like, are you seeing it becoming too competitive, or is it just that there's some bad actors and it's hard to get rid of them?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the copycat thing can be an issue, right? Because if you create something that is unique and it is yours, and you're the first one that launched it, it's okay to have people come in and do similar stuff. We're okay with that, but we're talking like blatantly like using, everything. So I think that they need to be better about that. That's a con, because it doesn't seem like they're cleaning up as they should be, right? I think that they're allowing that to happen. I think the other thing is like, they don't want you to use trademark stuff, right? But they're allowing it. And there's an easy, you can build in a filter. I mean, Amazon has it where they built it in, where if you use a trademark, if you put Disney in there, it would flag your listing immediately and you wouldn't be able to use it, right? So I just think that they need to do a better job at that. And they probably will. You know, I mean, especially after like these lawsuits start to happen and stuff, they don't want to be in the middle of that. It makes them look bad. Their stock prices going take a hit. Like you and I were talking at one point, Chris, like, so they don't want that negative light. So I do think it'll probably happen. It's just a matter of when, but I would say it's just, I don't say that it's, if you're creating good products and they are unique to you, maybe you're doing stuff that other people aren't willing to, like personalization is one of them. Like on Etsy, one way to stand out is to do personalization. You know why? Because not a lot of people want to do it. You know, it takes more time. It's not as scalable. So yeah, I just think that it's more of something you have to deal with, but it's not like it's the end of the world, right? Like it's just, it's going to happen. You're going to have competition. It's just a lot of times, like you said, like it's a bad actor. It's like you can try, but it's not the same.
So the thing in my head, and it's the brand registry program is what I was thinking of.
Oh, yes. There you go.
Right.
There you go.
I'd like to see Etsy have something like that. And that would kind of make it a grand
That's a great idea.
decision, because you're saying, look, here, this is a person, they are selling, it's a unique design. If you're selling something that very clearly infringes on this, right, it'd be like Etsy's own internal trademark copyright enforcement.
Yep.
Because especially with things like clothes, and I don't know exactly Debbie's whole copycat story. I just know that she has somebody that's been following her around, and literally like within minutes of her launching a product, they're trying to launch something very similar.
Not even very similar.
Clothes.
It's the same. It's the same.
And there's an e-commerce site, and it just came out in the news this week. And actually it was the guy that does like film theory and game theory, the Fashion Theory YouTube channel. They launched a new YouTube channel, and they were talking about this exact problem. It's really hard to get a copyright or trademark on like design type of stuff. And there's a website that goes after influencers who launch their own like clothes, and then they just create a knockoff version of it. They take photos that are exactly the same. You know, like if it's an Asian model wearing a white top and a black skirt, they take photos of an Asian model in the same pose, like the same hairstyle, right? All of this stuff. And it's really hard to enforce a trademark or a copyright on that. But the FTC can actually become involved with that because of the publication of the advertisements. So I'd like to see something there where Etsy is saying, look, like it's obvious that you're copying this. Let's not do that. And that would have to be some sort of internal Etsy program, because there's not really a law against that. Even if you have like unique designs and all those kinds of things, somebody else could just come kind of follow you around and do those kinds of things. But outside of that, it does kind of remind me, Scott, of Amazon back in 2014 in terms of a few things. One, like the frustrating things about competition, right? And two, the overall opportunity. So to me, I'm really excited about where Etsy is going. I'm excited about where Amazon FBA is going too. I just don't think if you're getting started today that would be my recommendation. And I wanted to ask you this because we got this question at the very beginning. They said, you know, would you still recommend that people sell on Amazon FBA? That was kind of the first part. And the answer is yeah. Like if you have a private label product, if you're not doing print on demand, if you're trying to start a beauty business or a supplement business or a fitness business, right? Like, yeah, you can sell some digital stuff on Etsy, but you're not going to be selling like all of the same things that you might be able to sell in an Amazon ecosystem. But would you recommend to your kids? And this to me is kind of the real answer to this question. To your best friend, to your kids, would you recommend in 2023, they have $5,000 to spend, right? So Amazon FBA is a possibility. What is the recommendation that you would give? Would you suggest that they start on Amazon or on Etsy, regardless of the niche, right? Like just go try to find a way to make this happen. It's your kids, your best friend. What do you recommend?
Yeah, well, first off, it does have to do with the niche. So if they are starting and they would come to me and say, I am trying to start a whatever lawnmower parts business, then I would not recommend them starting on Etsy. If they're saying, hey, I want to have a side hustle or even just I want a side hustle that could possibly turn into a full-time income, what would you recommend? I would definitely say, look at the niche. And then from there, try to find something that is also doing well on Etsy, but also that could do good outside of Etsy. So I'd be looking at those things. And I mean outside of Etsy, meaning like there's people searching for things around that. Right. So, you know, we talk about like, maybe it's like Western, right? People are into Western and rodeo and they're into that whole thing, country, farm, like country living, like all of those things. Well, yeah, there's a whole bunch of different areas you can go into, but there's also a lot of content that could be created around that. Outside of that, there's probably an email list that could be built around that. So those are the things that I look into. So I would say, think about your niche selection, doing your validation first. But I would look at Etsy, because I would try to make the Etsy side work because it's easier to get started. There's less upfront, and I can take that money that I'd put into inventory and I can put it into traffic and getting that thing rolling. So that's what I would recommend. It's easier in a sense of, for you to put up a new product to get, think about this. If I wanted to put up 5 new products with a new design, I literally will go into Printify, and I've done videos on this. If you guys haven't saw or watched that video on YouTube, I posted one where I did it through Printify. And I basically just took one design and I put on 5 different products. Like, I think I put it on a pillow. I think I put it on a blanket. I think I put it on a sweatshirt, a candle, and maybe a canvas print or something like that, right? Well, if I was to launch that stuff on Amazon FBA as a private labeled product, I would have to create that, buy 500 pillows, and then ship them in. How much is that going to cost me? $5 a pillow, right? So $2,500. Then I got to go ahead and, let's say I was going to do the candles. Well, now I got to buy the candles, and I got to, make sure that, they're right. And then maybe they're going to cost me $250, and I'm going to buy 500 of those, right? So I got to take those, and who knows? They might not really sell. I don't know. I've done my research. I think they're going to sell, but I don't really know, right? But if I did that same thing on Etsy, I can have those products listed in a day, and I can start driving traffic to them in a day, and I can get data back very quickly. So that's why I would say anyone right now, for me, in my circle of friends, family, whatever, if they're coming to me and saying, like, what would you do to make an extra 1,000, an extra 5,000 dollars per month, or something that you could then test and see if you want to scale it and bring it into other marketplaces or your own platform, it would be, I would use Etsy as my jumping off point, right? My testing point. Does that answer your question, Chris?
It does. And I think for me, there's a few key questions that I would want everybody to ask themselves. One, what is the exit plan, right? If you're cool with, you just want to make $1,000 a month and you don't want a $10 million payday on the back end of this, then definitely start with Etsy. Like we said, there's ways to get around that. You can build your Shopify. You can build a website. You can build your email. You can do all of that. And you should be doing that regardless of the platform. But if your goal is to have a big cash out at the end of this, then maybe we look more at the Amazon side of things. Mm-hmm. If it's not, if that's a nice bonus, and we're really looking at this to replace the 9-to-5 or the 8-to-4, like somebody said in the comments, right? If we're looking at this to just pay the mortgage, if we're looking at this to do that, I think the opportunity, especially because of the amount of risk that's involved on the Amazon side, right? $5,000 versus $500 if you really try to spend it. It makes the Etsy side of stuff a no-brainer. And then the second question would be, so the first question is, what is your exit plan, right? How much do you want to make? And is there a big payday that you want on the back end of this? Or are you okay with what you're earning every month based on your earnings on whichever site you choose? Yep. And then what is the niche, I think, is the other big one. Or what do you plan to sell? If you're trying to invent something, right? And Scott, I don't know that I've ever talked about this, but the first thing I ever sold on Amazon was a universal pot lid, right? So for pots and pans. And we sold our very first unit within 12 hours of creating the listing. That's how crazy Amazon was back in 2015, right? But if you're trying to sell pots and pans, you're trying to sell those kinds of things, probably better off on Amazon than you are on Etsy. Are there some people who are going to be buying pots on Etsy? Sure. Absolutely. But are you hand making them? Because if you're not, then there's some weird things you're going to have to navigate with. Did you make it? Is it yours? Right? Like, is it being mass produced in a factory in China? In which case you can't sell it on Etsy anyway, in a lot of cases. And so if you're like trying to invent something, you're trying to come up with a new product, then go to Amazon. If you're doing supplements, I would probably go to Amazon. If you're doing like big bulky fitness gear, take a look on Etsy, but probably Amazon is going to be where you're better off. Etsy, at least as of the recording of this, still skews more towards female niches, although that is changing. And because of some of the limitations that they have placed on it, it does have to be like a handmade one-off. You can't just have thousands of these sitting around in inventory. And so, if you want to work with a factory and manufacture something, that kind of skews you towards the Amazon side of things as well. So it'd be, what are you selling and what is the exit plan would be the two things that I would ask. But if it's just, I don't care what I'm selling, I'm happy with the money that I'm making, then okay, go find something that interests you, do the niche research on Etsy. And if the niche research shows you that there's enough volume to hit your number, and that is the thing that I kind of want everybody to think about, is what is that number, right? Is it $1,000 a month? Is it $5,000 a month? Is it
Makes
$1
a
million?
difference.
If it's $1 million a month, you're probably looking at Amazon, right?
Yep.
Like, let's just be honest about that.
Yep.
Unless you want to do nothing for the next 2 years except launch 20 products a day, right? Probably not what you want to do. But if you're looking to make $500, $1,000, $5,000, even $10, $20, $30,000 a month, that's very doable in the Etsy ecosystem. And if that's where your number falls, then you just have to do the math backwards to figure out how you're going to get there in whatever niche it is that you're looking at. We've done a whole episode on that, so we don't have to get into that. But that would kind of be my process there. So how much do you want to make? What do you want the payday to be at the end? And then what is it? Do you have an idea of what you want to sell? If you do, then we can figure out if it works on Etsy. If it does, great. If it doesn't, then we go to the Amazon route.
Here's one other thing I'd like to add, because this is what I've been realizing now selling on Etsy with my wife, and even seeing Debbie and seeing what she's done. I find that Etsy is also a little bit more sporadic, meaning the sales may not be as consistent as they are on Amazon. Now, that may just be the niche, don't know. But I know myself that I don't care how I make the 6 figures or whatever the number is, as long as I hit it in that 12-month calendar year, right? And so, and what I'm getting at is this: you may have products that do really, really well in fourth quarter, but the rest of the year, they just do okay. And you know what? That's okay. Because I think about our photography business years ago. That's how our photography business was. And it did really well. And we actually kind of enjoyed it because we would hunker down for 4 months and we would just knock through doing our sessions, right? And we would sell a whole bunch. And that would be a bulk of our income for the year. And then after that, we'd kind of chill a little bit and we would, do our steady, but it wouldn't be as busy and as crazy. So I think sometimes you got to look at it as you're building the business to create the income that you want, but that income doesn't have to be like every single month. It has to be predictable, because Etsy, I don't believe, is a predictable, selling machine in a sense, as Amazon, I think, is more, but it might just be the type of products that are being sold as well on Amazon. Like, well, if you're into selling mower blades and gardener parts, or, lawnmower parts, probably going to do better in the summer, spring, maybe fall, but then you're going to kind of slow down, right? So it's the same kind of idea. There's probably going to be, peaks and valleys and all of that stuff where you're going to be wondering like, well, why aren't I getting a whole bunch of sales right now? It just may be that you sell more in certain months, and that's okay. So just something else to think about. And that's what I've been noticing with Etsy.
Yeah, I think regardless of the niche that you're in or whatever, right, you're always going to have things that are selling better at different times of the year. I've just noticed that it is slightly more pronounced on Etsy than it is on Amazon, right? Like even on Amazon, everybody jokes about the fourth quarter. It's Christmas for everybody, right? Because you can have anything on the website and it sells. And Etsy does feel like that to some extent, but it also feels like there's more of a swing there. Whereas, and I'm just making numbers up, right? We might see a 30% boost on Amazon during the fourth quarter. You see like 100% boost, right? You double or triple in sales on Etsy, because Etsy, and this is something Etsy is trying to get away from as well. Etsy is seen more and more as a like gift giving site, right? You can go find really cool, unique things. It's part of their value proposition, but it also means that people are only going to that website when they are looking for a gift or for something unique, versus Amazon. And somebody said something, Scott, they said, boring is sexy on Amazon. Right? Like, if the most boring thing in the world is going to be the best thing that you can sell on Amazon, which is why I love that you've gone not with the classic garlic press example, but the lawnmower blades thing, because lawnmower blades are not something anybody ever really thinks about until they need it. Nobody's looking for like handcrafted lawnmower. I'm sure there's like 2 guys who are screaming in the comments right now, right? But like, no,
lawnmower
nobody's
racing,
really digging around looking for handcrafted lawnmower blades.
a
But
wheel.
it is something that everybody who has a lawn needs, whether they are buying them for themselves or buying them for the people who are cutting their grass, right? Indirectly, somebody has to buy that. And that's not what's on Etsy. What's on Etsy is something you want for yourself. That's a really cool accent piece, like this weird cactus candle thing behind me, or like this weird lamp. I don't know which direction I am, right?
Yeah,
This
you're right there.
lamp,
There it is.
Seashells and salt, I guess, or just really, really white sand. Not sure. But that's the kind of stuff that you would find more on Etsy, but it's not something that you're buying every day or that 100 people are looking for every day. And so there is more elasticity around holidays. And that's why, like, one of the things that you talked about at the end of last year was having a holiday calendar for your niche, because everybody's going to have that Q4 success, but how can we replicate that throughout the year? Well, if we acknowledge that Etsy is a gift giving, cool stuff platform, right? I would wager most of the purchases on Etsy are not for the person buying. They're for somebody else that they are giving it to, versus Amazon, where like, yeah, you might jump on and buy your nephew a birthday gift and send it to him because it's free 2-day shipping. But most of the stuff that you're buying in the Amazon ecosystem is usually for yourself. And so if we can do some of that holiday planning and look at the different times of the year where it might spike for our niche in addition to Q4 and plan for those things in advance, then we can smooth that out a little bit. We're still going to almost always have a big spike in Q4 because that's when most people give the most gifts, right? You have Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Christmas, all on top, Festivus, New Year's, Thanksgiving, Halloween, all right on top of each other. But is there a way we can smooth that out in our niche? And I think if you guys go watch that video, as well, that'll give you a really good idea of kind of how to balance that out. It's not going to make it totally smooth. You're still going to see a big jump, like October 1st, right? But we can smooth that out and make that a little bit more consistent throughout the year by doing a little bit of pre-planning. And once that's done, then it is a little bit more of an evergreen feel, even than something like Amazon. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And, I just think that there will be those peaks. Like, I think in some niches are going to have more peaks than others. Like, I'm just thinking of like Halloween. Like, there's some niches that you're going to do really good around Halloween. Or can you figure out a few products that would do well in your niche for Halloween? And then you can take advantage of that spike in traffic, right? Or maybe it's teacher day or teacher week or whatever, right? Like, that's going to be building up. Father's Day, Mother's Day, like any of the ones. That's why we always talk about there are going to be those different peaks. And that's why we want to almost pre-plan, not almost, we want to pre-plan. And I actually did a whole video on that, on how to basically holiday hack and really take advantage of those. And that's what we're actually doing as we speak. So, and I'll link that up in the description. If you guys are watching this on the replay, I'll have all the links to whatever we mentioned in the description. So definitely make sure that you check that out. But yeah, so we just wanted to jump on here, guys, to really share like Amazon, FBA, which is fulfilled by Amazon for those of you that are just joining us, and usually private labeling, which is basically taking a product, sourcing it from China or any other place, and then putting your brand on it, and then it becomes your product. White labeling is what they also call it, but it's private labeling is what we've always called it. And that's still a thing, and it's still out there, and it's still working. So we went over the pros and cons to that. We went over the Etsy print on demand. We didn't really talk about the digital side, which is a whole nother conversation. But it's a whole nother opportunity. And some people said, well, Scott, didn't you shoot a video that you said, like, forget Etsy digital products? And the answer is, well, no, I basically said, if I was to start, it wouldn't be using a digital product. Most likely, depending on the niche. I'd be going after some pod products because they're pretty easy to do and there's less competition, because digital products, there's more competition. But in a perfect world, I would do both and have it be a hybrid. Anyway, Chris, any questions that we had here that we wanted to address before we mosey on out of here?
I think we've actually tackled most of them as we came through, because the ones that were coming in were about stuff that we actually ended up covering, which I love. Somebody on Facebook just said, thanks, guys. You make cleaning my desk easier. I take that as the ultimate compliment, because it's the thing I always try to avoid doing. So I like that. Scott, Is there anything else you wanted to cover on this? Any other last pieces of advice that you wanted to leave people with in terms of how to make their decision, which one you prefer, anything like that?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to the individual. Like I said, I mean, depending on what your target is, what you are looking to do, where you're at in your journey. I know some people are on Amazon and they're struggling and they're like, I'm done. Like I'm done. I want to get out of here. That's kind of what we did. Now we ended up, having a perfect separation because we sold the business. And then after that, I was like, all right, we're clean, got a clean slate now. We made some money. Let's just take a pause and let's figure out what we want to do next. And that's where we kind of got into the Etsy side. So it really does depend on where you are in your journey, what you're looking to achieve. And again, that could be financially and also what you're going to enjoy. I think that's a big one. I think you should be thinking to yourself, like, what am I going to enjoy working on, even if I'm not making money yet? And for me and for my wife, who's the creator of our brand or on the Etsy side, is really, she's just looking at it as like, what can I do creatively that I enjoy doing? Me, on the other hand, I enjoy the marketing side. So I'm always like in the weeds using Everbee, like using the tools to give her a heads up on where I would start pointing the direction. So we have a really good, team, if you will, just her and I, to be able to do that. But I think it is an individual thing and really what you're looking to achieve. Are you looking to start this thing for a side hustle and then grow it into a full-time business? It's totally doable. So yeah, I would just say, take inventory of where you are and where you want to go, and then just figure it out on what area you want to, or what road you want to go down. Amazon FBA, or is it Etsy? I personally,
Love it.
I'm an Etsy fan right now.
Yeah, I'm in doing both, and I would say if I was getting started, right, if I were to start from scratch right now, I would be starting on Etsy, no questions asked, unless I fall into one of those weird exceptions that we were talking about, right? If I want to make $10 million on an exit, if I, am selling something that I couldn't sell on Etsy, and that's the only thing that I'm passionate about, then I would be looking at Amazon FBA. But if I'm open to a few different niches, if I'm looking to just replace my income or to have a stable source of income outside of my 9-to-5 job, right? I just want to pay my mortgage, something like that. Etsy is definitely the place to start. Yes, there are more Etsy sellers than there were previously, but there's also more Etsy buyers and there's more opportunity, I would say, Scott, than there was in the past, because Etsy has been open about wanting to bring brands to Etsy, making it be a place where you can connect with your customers and build long-term relationships. That has me extremely excited for 2023 and beyond, because that's what we love to do. That's the approach that we advocate anyway. And so we're going to start to see, at least just based on what we're seeing from Etsy, some of the, a little bit less of the like fly by night, I sell just t-shirts people, and more of the, I am a store about backyard chickens. I'm a beach decor store, right? And we're going to start to see more brands, which means we're going to see more consistent traffic. Some of those cons are going to go away, and we're going to continue to see more opportunity. If this is something you're trying to make the consideration of, now is the time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I would say, again, to kind of echo what Chris said, like, depending on what your goal is. And honestly, the other thing you have to ask yourself, if you are looking to build a $10 million business, do you want to deal with the headaches? Even though it sounds all good, right? It's all sounding good. And guys, don't get me wrong. I've been down the road where I see this vision and I see the money goal, right? But then as you start to work towards it, you start to see all of the problems, all of the things you have to deal with on an everyday basis. I'm at the part in my life. I mean, I just turned 50. I just want less, as far as not even like, not that I want less money. I want less responsibility. I want to be able to have a freer calendar, and I don't want to be stressed out. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to really matter to me. Now that's me, right? That's my wife. Like, that's our vision, right? I'm not looking where I got to make $10 million. I just want to make consistent money. I want to enjoy what I'm doing. And I just want to be able to kind of create my own, my own flexibility, my own schedule. So I've kind of dialed things back a little bit as far as like how hard I want to go. Don't get me wrong. I'm still pretty aggressive when it goes to going after that goal. I'm more like, okay, I got to be more thoughtful about where my time is spent. And to me, Etsy just seems like it's kind of chill. Oh, the one thing I didn't mention also, Chris, customers on Etsy are nicer. They're nicer. I'm just saying. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe in the comments you can let us know. Have you noticed that customers on Etsy are nicer than the customers on Amazon? Is it just because Amazon is like, doesn't matter, we'll just give you your money back. Doesn't matter, we'll just do this. Or are they afraid of reviews or like what? I don't know, but it seems like the Etsy customers are just easier to deal with. And I don't know, Chris, have you experienced any of that?
Yeah, that's the politically correct way of putting what I texted you the other day. People on Etsy just seem to be a little bit more relaxed. And I think it's because they don't need 2-day shipping on the lawnmower blade, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're buying something, and as long as it gets there for their friend's birthday, for their nephew's birthday, for Christmas, they're going to be okay with it. And what I have noticed is even if it doesn't get there on time, you're like, look, the postal system is broken, right? Like you've watched the news. I shipped it 2 weeks ago. It should be there. People are a lot more forgiving. Now, do you still have to do basic customer service stuff? Should you still try to do whatever you can do to resolve that issue? Yes. But Etsy doesn't come like slap you right away like Amazon always seem to. And people don't just write you a message that like says something to the effect of, where the heck is my stuff? Right? It's like, hey, I noticed the shipping a couple days ago and I still haven't gotten it yet. Like, can you check on that for me? As opposed to like, I can't believe it's not here right now. Like 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't understand.
I'm demanding a refund.
UPS doesn't go. And I think that is partly because of what is mainly sold on Etsy, but I also think it's the ecosystem that Etsy themselves have created, right? They started with unique handcrafted things and they're expanding out beyond that. But the biggest portion of the customer base came in and you find one thing, it's not just sitting in a warehouse somewhere where they don't have a reason why they couldn't ship it to you that second, right? Most of the stuff on Etsy is either handmade or it's produced or whatever. And so there is a little bit more wiggle room and a little bit more automatic forgiveness in the shipping process because they know that it's being created, right? It's not just sitting in an Amazon warehouse that they can see from their house. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it's just more personal. And I think that they know that it's a small shop. I mean, that's kind of how it's portrayed. And that's why I think it does help though, because, as a shop owner, you should be messaging and you do get rewarded for messaging within 24 hours and things like that. So I think that as you are more real and a human and not a company, it actually helps you on Etsy.
Well, that's another big difference. And I don't want to keep everybody for the rest of the afternoon because we could do this all day, but the way that the different platforms promote who is selling their stuff is, I think, what makes the biggest difference here. On Etsy, people know they are not buying from Etsy. They are buying from Scott. They are buying from Zazzle Marketing. They're buying from Heather Pearson's. They're buying from Chris. They're buying from Debbie. On Amazon does everything they possibly can to make you think that you're buying from Amazon, even when you're buying from a third-party seller. Yeah. So the customer service responses that you get are the responses that people would write to Amazon if Amazon was the person that they had the problem with.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you are a multi-trillion-dollar company. Your founder is the richest person in the world, and you can't send my razor blades from the warehouse that I can see from my house. I can walk there and go, why can't I just go pick it up? Right. Like, that's the ticket that you get on Amazon. You're like, dude, I'm like a 3-person shop in Southern Arizona. Or wherever, right? You're like, I'm not Amazon. Amazon just ships and fulfills the orders for me. Let me see what they did wrong. Versus Etsy, where it's like, you are communicating with Scott. You are communicating with Debbie. You purchased this item from this person. And Etsy even does that in their automated follow-ups, right? They send you the thing and they're like, here's how to communicate with the person you bought from. Versus Amazon, where they send you like the Amazon receipt and all of this. But then when you click the button, it shows up in my inbox and you're yelling at me about Jeff Bezos, right? Like, I think it's the difference in how the marketplaces market who is selling the stuff. And so if you want to be a nameless, faceless person that sells lawnmower blades, FBA is a great way to go. If you want to have a place that you're starting to build that foundation, even for the stuff like offsite, right? You want to build a personal brand, you want to do some of those kinds of things. Etsy would be the place I would recommend for something like that as well. And it's just how they market it's a slight difference in the marketplaces. They both have traffic, but they treat that traffic very differently.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, do me a favor. If you've gotten value from this episode, then go ahead and smash the like button. Give us a little love there. We would like to see if you guys actually got value. A bunch of comments came through, so I'm pretty sure you did. So if you can do that for us, if you're on YouTube, you can go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you want to become part of our live streams and you're listening to this on the podcast, you can always head on over to brandcreators.com/group, and you can join us there. You can ask questions there. We're showing up here every single week for you on a live stream. So yeah, we'd love to have you. All right. So guys, that is it. That's going to wrap it up. As always, take care, take action, have an awesome, amazing day, and we'll see you right back here on the next episode. Take care, guys.